welcome everybody. Let's talk real estate. Your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current commercial real estate market here in Southern California. As we take a no BS look at both sides of the issues driving this market today to find the best solutions going forward. With our man right in the middle, it's Barry Saywitz. Hey, Barry.
Hey, good morning, Paul. And good morning to all of our viewers and our listeners out there. Thanks again for tuning in. If it's Tuesday, we're talking real estate. I am Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company and managing partner of Barry Saywitz Properties. And we're back here again another Tuesday talking some more real estate. Before we get going, I do want to do a shout out since today is Valentine's Day. I want to wish a happy Valentine's Day to my sweetheart, to my family, and to everybody else out there who has a sweetheart. And for those who don't have a sweetheart, still have a happy Valentine's Day. So enough with the mushy stuff. I want to move on to something a little more exciting and fruitful. Today's real estate topic, I'm excited. We have a very special guest with us. Our guest is Kerry Vandell, who is the Dean's Professor Emeritus of Real Estate and here at UCI. So he didn't have to come far to come and join us this morning. Kerry, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Barry.
Yeah, so you have a long history here at UCI and with the Center for Real Estate and in real estate in general. You've been here since 2006 and sort of helped get the Center for Real Estate at UCI going. I guess talk to me about how that sort of transpired and how you got into real estate, I guess, number one, and then number two, how you ended up here.
You're starting at the beginning, huh?
Yeah, let's rewind. Let's go.
I won't go back all the way, but no, I actually grew up in Texas, from Amarillo, Texas originally, and went to Rice University back in the mid to late 60s, interesting times, and had intended to go into aerospace engineering, but they went to the moon about that time, and I saw that there wasn't going to be a lot to do. So I thought, well, what else is there to do where I could use my engineering background, my interest in a variety of different issues having to do with essentially engineering or applied topics. And I happened to take a class the last year I was at Rice that related generally to urban development issues. And one of our guest speakers was a young man back then named Gerald Hines.
Sure.
And Gerald Hines had a background in mechanical engineering, as I did, mechanical and aerospace. And he started building industrial properties back in the 60s in Houston. And was just about to start the Galleria complex at that time. And after that presentation, I never realized until later that it totally transformed my life, in that it made me realize that real estate was much more fascinating than getting oil out of the ground, which was where I was headed otherwise. Yeah. So I decided to go back to graduate school in real estate related issues. That was also a period of time during the late 60s, early 70s when there was a lot of interest in urban problems, urban development.
Right.
And so I went off to programs in those areas first at Harvard, where I got my master's at the Graduate School of Design at the time, and then at MIT when I completed my PhD there. I guess it was 1976 is when I began my academic career, and did a variety of things there and getting involved in research, much reading, much interaction with a lot of interesting people at the time, both from the private sector and the public sector, who were involved in problems of housing, urban development, real estate development in the private sector, and how that related to it was a very different attitude toward commercial real estate.
Well,
at that time.
Certainly different times,
yeah,
and
right.
for a lot of reasons.
Right, but I finished in 76 and went off to decided to go back to Texas, and I was offered a position at what became the Cox School of Business at SMU in Dallas, and served there until I was 1985. I was a full professor at that time. actually 1985, 1989, when I went off to the University of Wisconsin, where I was recruited to head that program, which had been a very long-standing, well-regarded program. For those of you who are Badgers out there, and many of you that don't know about that, there's a whole Wisconsin mafia even out here in Southern California that were, many of whom were grass camp students.
Yeah.
Jim Grasscamp, who was an acknowledged lion in the field at that time. So I took on the difficult job of succeeding him. No one could replace Jim Grasscamp, but the program continued to develop and expand and was highly regarded. And I left Wisconsin in actually 2006, and that's another story. I was recruited out here by Andy Policano, who had become the dean of the Mirage School. But the story is he was my dean for many years at the University of Wisconsin. And his opinion when he got out here, there was not really any sort of formal real estate program in the business school or anywhere around down here. USC did have their program up north. And he said, what is wrong with this picture? So we need to do this. So he and his colleagues at UCI combined their talents to recruit me and my wife here. My wife was a professor in education, later became a founding dean of the School of Education there, and to really start up the program here and get that organized in a similar fashion to what we had at our center and real estate program at Wisconsin. So I began that process, and when the time came that I knew I was going to be becoming emeritus at 70 and a half or so, it was time to recruit a successor and to get the best person who was out there. And I happened to find him, I believe, in Ed Colson, who has done a superb job. And I think he was on one of your earlier
He was on
programs.
a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And so it comes full circle.
Yes.
And so we're happy to have you, and we're glad you made the trek out and got out of the cold. I did the same, and I know how it goes. I love the Midwest. I just don't want to go there in the winter.
Yeah.
So, and so here we are today, right? And you're still going and still taking a hard look at what happens with the economy and the different factors that go into not only the real estate market, but those that sort of guide it and affect it. And we could probably do an entire show on your background, but it's I'm impressed and certainly extensive, and we're glad with all the contributions that you've made for UCI to help it grow. So thank you for all that you have done and continue to do.
Thank you.
So I want to take sort of a high-level look. I want to go backwards in time relative to Orange County, relative to Southern California. We've done many shows on trying to focus on what's happening today and what's going to happen tomorrow. And people watch the stock market and it goes up and it goes down, and people watch the real estate market and interest rates. But really, economics and a broader scope of things is really more in a wider time period. And so let's rewind to Orange County. Orange County, historically, agriculture. Historically not really the center of real estate and the center of tourism. It became a tourism place when the train came in with the beaches and all of that. But from your perspective, how did Orange County get to where it is today in terms of getting on the map?
Yeah. Barry, that area was not exactly my core area of doing research and interest at the time. I was involved in a lot of issues relating to valuation of complex property interests, of mortgage default risk, and expert witness testimony in a number of cases relating to those issues. But what always fascinated me about Orange County, and part of the reason I was attracted here, is because it has an immensely unique story and an immensely unique situation, I think, in terms of urban development. And I became interested into the sort of things that occurred. Were there some major aha moments, similar to what I had with Gerald Hines, that made a huge difference in retrospect, and looking back in time with respect to the future? And were those things, were they foreseen? Did they foresee the future? Or was it just serendipity? Things happened in such a way. And I began looking back at that and can give you a few of those points and
Yeah,
major dates if that's of interest.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, I grew up in the Midwest, but we moved and I spent my high school days in San Diego, and I went to college at UCLA in Los Angeles. And so for me, stopping off in Irvine was I used the restroom and I look at the orange trees. And, I'm not that old, whereas I'm all the way back in time, but there wasn't a whole lot of reasons to stop unless maybe you were going to hit the beach or the restroom. And then all of a sudden it really starts taking off.
Right. No, it really has been a long traipse back to the past. My first exposure, actually personally, to Southern California, beyond going to Disneyland as a kid soon after it opened, was as a tracking missiles out of San Nicolas, coming out of Vandenberg, from San Nicolas Island, which was a Navy tracking station. And I spent weekends with a friend whose his parents lived in Santa Ana at that time, was an engineer, and they spent their weekends down on Laguna Beach. And we'd go down to Morro Beach, which is now cleared out. It's Crystal Cove.
Right.
And we would do various things that I won't speak of now down on the beach. But we all had that same impression of this place. But it really goes back in time. If you actually start, what were the things that you'd really identify? I'd have to say the first thing would be in the 1850s, around 1857, when I think the first agricultural community was formed in Anaheim with a group of immigrants from Germany. And they formed, that was the beginning of Anaheim. That's a German name.
Yeah.
I didn't realize at the time. And that was just the beginning, really, of the agricultural system here. Prior to this, there was some winemaking and all of that, but not really active marketing of agricultural product with larger scale, by their standards, farms. And that began that whole process. So that initiated, after that, the formation of some of what we call the agricultural market towns out in North County in particular. But the South still remained. At that time, it was still very much the
Pristine.
Irvine Ranch and so forth was pristine. It was primary ranching, and agriculture did not extend that far at the beginning. But then going, I guess, to the next big thing that was purposeful and well known, the Central Pacific Railroad and Huntington. They were intending to try to extend that. They had gone as far as Fullerton and ultimately down to Santa Ana by 1876, but it couldn't go any further. And it turned out, when it got into this, it was a major battle between Huntington at that time, Collis Huntington, and James Irvine. And Irvine would not let them go through his land. And you say, well, what difference does that make anyway? It didn't. Well, it turned out it made a lot of difference because that maintained the intensity of that agriculture up there. They didn't really have the transport network, the marketing network. There weren't those sort of roads that we see today down to the South County. And so as a result, a lot of that activity stayed up at the north. And you say, well, it's not good for Irvine, right? Well, maybe in the short run it wasn't. Maybe in the longer run it was.
It probably was.
Maybe it was. But in the end, Huntington was able to stop that development. Now later, the Santa Fe came through here, obviously went down to Capistrano, but that was a number of years later.
And that really opened it up for people to come from Los Angeles or San Diego and to be able to get to Orange County for a day,
here.
Right?
That's right. But there was less of that because it wasn't so much, they didn't have good transport to the beach. I mean, this was all inland, and it only went so far as Santa Ana at the time. The next big thing is like in 1889, and that was when Orange County voted to essentially secede from LA County and form its own county, and ultimately selected Santa Ana. There was competition, but ultimately selected Santa Ana as the county seat. And that was a very, in retrospect, huge, because it's created this sense of separateness, that we have our own economy here, we have our own activity. So from a legal standpoint, and in retrospect, looking back now, especially with respect to the issues confronting sort of Los Angeles, many parts of Los Angeles County, those sorts of things were not influencing us at the time. It wasn't, the county seat was not elsewhere. It was down here. The next thing is actually in 1904, and this, Barry, is when they actually did get to the coast. That's when Huntington brought his red line down to the coast to Newport, and that opened up, the first access, or at least good rail access. The roads were not yet in great shape, but they did start to be built. By the 1920s, we were getting a road system going through, and there were the beginnings of activity through the county. Very active agricultural community, especially up north, the beginnings of that down in the South County also, and the beginnings of the development of the beach towns where weekenders and so forth come down. So that occurred beginning in 1926, I think, is when they completed the highway through to San Diego. And then, luckily, growth was starting to begin, but that was put an immediate stop to with the Depression, the Great Depression, and then the years of war. So from 1930 or so to 1945, we were in a situation here where growth and migration essentially stopped. There was very little growth. And so as a result, in 1945, that was the next major, of course, many servicemen coming back, huge amounts of migration, huge bulge in population growth in the late 40s, early 50s, going on through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So that post-war growth really started to have an impact. And that was something that early on was relatively untouched down in South County, in Irvine and further south. These were the remnants of the old Spanish land grants that were held by a number of individuals we all know about. And this comes to that next major jump in what went on. And it just happened to be at the right time to have the right sort of thing happen. That's from around 1957 through the early 60s. And that was when the Irvine Company was built. They had a lot of controversy, which most people who have been in Orange County for some time are well aware about how should it be developed. It was a mobile oil and development company for a while that had certain potential rights. They were going to acquire much of the Irvine Ranch for their own plans for development. That was when folks like Joan Irvine Smith and Donald Bren ultimately played a huge role in. And some people aren't aware of it, but Al Taubman, who was a former head of Sotheby's,
who was a partner, right?
He was a partner. He was a partner in all of that, and he was actually chairman of the board of the Irvine Company for a while. But we brought him up here before he passed away. He lived in New York, obviously now. But he had fascinating stories to tell about that whole period. But the immense impact that those folks had on the future of development in terms of bringing in Pereira, the best of master planning at that time, at least.
And then when they came on board, you had a road system, you had master planning, you had residential communities.
That's right.
And then it was a draw.
And that's right. And then that really shaped the South County and really set the platform for what we have today. I guess I won't go into the details of all of that.
Well, so let's fast forward because I've been taking copious notes, and I'm prepared for the exam at the end of the show, and I brought my number 2 pencil. But I want to fast forward. So, it's fascinating stuff, and certainly for people that aren't familiar with it, you go from really agricultural to a suburban environment to today, which is really, while it's still suburban, it's pretty well built out. And now the next phase of what's happening is you have redevelopment, you have highest and best use, and you have cities individually trying to look at how they are able to deal with the continued growth, the continued migration, the continued housing issues and economic issues that are going to impact them going forward. And so now I want to sort of shift it, and we'll take the needle and kind of look forward. And when I say forward, I don't mean tomorrow or next week, but if we're going to look out 5 or 10 or 15 years and project what Orange County might look like, or the coastal areas or the inland areas, there are certain, I guess, broader scope issues relative to housing and labor force and the dynamics of the economic environment. What is your take on where Orange County is going forward, and what will be the sort of the next aha moments, if you will,
right.
and what are the major things that you think will impact sort of the real estate market and the development and growth of Orange County?
Right.
It's a long question.
Well, yeah, it is. Hopefully it won't be a long answer.
We may have to extend the show.
We'll extend the show. This comes to why is the history important, right? It has to do with that the history can inform the future in a way, because you can see the major factors that have evolved that have put us in the situation that we have today, which is by and large very positive relative to some of our competitor areas.
And you talk about Orange County versus LA or versus Inland Empire, and while it's all part of the Southern California dynamic, and they are interrelated, really Orange County's got its own sort of unique set of circumstances.
It does, and there are a number of areas that we'll touch upon where we do have the unique situation, in part because of the history and the decisions that were made serendipitously or purposefully. But there's one thing, if you look at those folks who actually study city development, both economists as well as planners and social scientists, but there are certain things that are just clear. That first, growth is cities are dynamic over time. The growth takes place. There's a lot of uncertainty with respect to what the future holds, but there are things that we know as growth takes place, that it'll always increase distances among activities. You have to go further and further as cities get larger. It increases congestion and density, because with all that activity and more people moving around, that's always the case. Increases prices, rents, and costs. For land, housing, commercial development, services, for everything. And that's clear within the city, because you have these, what we call supply inelasticities, of where this can be, you can match demand and supply for various activities in the city. Growth with supply constraints, where there's rigid growth boundaries, possibly, allocations for open space. There can be many rationales for the existence of that, which could be good. But they drive up prices even higher, because inelastic supply for future development will naturally drive up prices. Growth increases competition, because you have more bodies. As you get a critical mass of individuals out there, they create a competitive environment on the demand and the supply side. It increases diversity. And what that means is, for every interest group you have, and maybe for every ethnic group you have, there are affinity groups that have a critical mass. I mean, there's not every place that can have a little Ethiopia and so forth.
Right.
We have those. But what has happened here is we're all aware, is we're in a very sort of supply-constrained market now, in part because we've just grown to the edge of our boundaries, to the developable land and the sea. We also have large allocations to open space. We have parks, all very positive. But the reality is, land is becoming increasingly inelastic in its availability. Another thing that history informs us is there's cycling of neighborhoods, of subdivisions, of business centers. That properties age over time. If you look at the average life of a property, it could be 30 to 50 years.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it's less than that, with rapid growth.
And you see that pretty prevalent in the East Coast and in the Midwest, where you've seen, sort of inventing of different neighborhoods, whether that's ethnicity, whether that's redevelopment of properties. And to me, Orange County is not old enough to have had multiple cycles like you would see with that. But you're starting now to see that. And you see that in parts of Anaheim. You see that in west side of Costa Mesa. You see that in parts of San Clemente, where you have older areas that are now, getting redeveloped for the next cycle of what's to come.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right, Barry. Now, some of it is starting now. We actually do have that. In fact, Santa Ana, and most people aren't aware of this, it's the highest density of any large city in the country beyond, I think there are 3 cities, San Francisco, Boston, and New York. May have been 3, I'm not sure. but we're the next city. Santa Ana has over 300,000 people, well over 300,000. But it's older.
Yeah.
Anaheim is older now, and you're getting the recycling. I sit on the board of Jamboree Housing, it's affordable housing developer, and many of our projects in Orange County have been either redevelopment of infill sites that are either vacant or that have existing older motels on them that have been converted now, or we're converting to affordable housing provision. So you're seeing an increasing proportion of what's going on, including in the business parks, where they're recycling some of the older industrial warehouse stock, and you have new facilities going up. Or repurposed facilities.
Repurposed, also. Right. We talk about that all the time, right? You, even with the shopping malls or with older antiquated office buildings. And so, to me, that's a cycle of highest and best use. And I think that, business will drive and entrepreneurship will drive some of that redevelopment and some of that regentrification of these neighborhoods.
And it drives it, but the extent to which it can actually take place is dependent heavily on the sort of restrictions or lack thereof of allowing that to happen. And we all know with land use regulatory policy could be very restrictive in that regard, especially as it relates to the housing market. And that could really be provide a great deal of restriction on the natural transformation, or the term that economists oftentimes use, the filtering of the stock and the rejuvenation, the renovation of the stock. And to the extent that we want to rigidly impose this and put the entire urban development framework into a rigid skeleton, does not permit the county to continue to grow and to be economically viable in the same, or socially viable in the same sort of way.
So do you think you go up as opposed to out, since you can't
some of it could be up, some of it certainly could be up, and that could be encouraged. It depends upon the market. Let the market operate, and operate within those constraints, so long as certain sort of objectives in terms of open space, environment, climate, quality of the climate, social objectives are satisfied.
And do you see that, unlike Los Angeles, where you have all these little pockets of neighborhoods and they have all different other issues with congestion and other things, do you think that Orange County will learn from looking north and try and stay away from that? Or is it an inevitability that the more people that come, the more congestion you have, and the more people that are here, you have some of the same issues that we have in Los Angeles?
We have the benefit of sort of knowing what they did back in the 60s and 70s in terms of creating the great environment we have now. But going forward in time, there's still, the jury is still out on the extent to which master planned communities can actually be organic and not just rigid, and allowing the markets to evolve. For example, the Irvine Business Park, when it became apparent that some of those properties were not really the highest and best use as they were at that time, there was some conversion to residential, and you're starting to see increasing amount of that in various sorts of things. And there seems to be an acceptance in certain contexts of that sort of thing going on. But there is a valid question as to what extent master planning, if rigidly employed and maintained, can have an adverse effect going forward. I think that's one of the major issues we have to face going forward.
So let's bring it full circle, because I told you it'd go fast when we started, and it did, and we only have 2 minutes left. And so I want to bring it home for the folks out there that are listening. We're talking high-level stuff, and I enjoy it. But in terms of the average person who's out there, who looks at it and says, geez, should I stay in Orange County for the long haul? Is this a affordable, worthwhile place for me to be with all the pluses and the minuses that it has? Should I buy a home, and is that a worthwhile long-term investment, or hold on to my cash? I know those are economic things as opposed to the broad picture, but what's your advice to people in the long term for Orange County? Is it continue to be one of the top, in my opinion, one of the top places in the country to live and to work?
Well, that's my opinion too, Barry. So we wouldn't be out here. I mean, one of the things that attracted my wife and me here is that Orange County is not, frankly, as embroiled in some of the major ideological extreme issues that are confronting this country today.
Right.
That there's a lot of discussion out there. That's not to say we're ignoring problems or
But we're not the
just
hotbed.
giving carte blanche to anyone to do whatever they want. But I think this is a place where there is rational dialogue going on. You see it going on in all of these communities, and I think there's a very good relationship between the public, the private, and the nonprofit sector here. And I didn't get a chance to do a plug for UCI, but it's played a major role in this in a way, and I think will be a major role, and all the educational institutions.
Well, and you've seen them all really grow dramatically
Exactly.
over the course of the past, not even that long, but 10, 20 years, really.
Exactly.
Get on the board, whether it's Fullerton or Cal State or Chapman or certainly UCI.
That's correct. Yeah. And no, we're in a very good place, and I'm very optimistic, frankly, so long as there's recognition that this change is going to occur. We're not going to maintain everything in exactly the same situation that we've been in all the time. And that change will occur, and hopefully will occur, because it has to occur if we're going to continue to be viable.
Yeah, and my take on it is, look, I like the diversity, diversity of the business opportunities, the diversity of the population, the diversity of cultures, and at the same time, I like the fact that this, I think, long term will continue to be a desirable place for people to want to live and work. And so long term, as it relates back to the real estate, if we bring it home, I think the investment in real estate in Orange County, for those out there looking to buy, whether it's a house or a building or an investment property, we've talked about it before. If you buy it now and you're in it for the long haul, you should be just fine.
Well, having been here for 17 years
You would
now,
know.
I can attest to that fact.
Yeah.
So
if you're thinking about it, dig deep. The difficult part is barrier to entry is certainly very difficult, especially in today's environment. But I think long term, Orange County is here to stay. Orange County is going to continue to be a viable, desirable place to live and work. And Kerry, I thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, and we could go all day, and I wish we had more time, and we'll have you back maybe later in the year. We'll take a look back and look at some other issues. But again, much continued success to you and the group
Thanks
at
very
UCI.
much.
Thanks for coming on.
thank you, Barry.
Yeah. So I am Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company, and we are out of time. But thank you again to all of our listeners and our viewers out there for tuning in. And we'll see you back here next week on Let's Talk Real Estate.
Well, there you have it. You've been listening to Let's Talk Real Estate, your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current state of the real commercial real estate market right here in Southern California. On Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio, streaming live from our studio here at the University of California Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.